Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at something that might sound a little bit dry at first glance, phonology.
Yeah.
But stick with us, because this is all about how we can learn to pronounce better in any language. We've got a great piece of research by Edward Odisho that we're going to be looking at today, and Odisho. And this is really all about kind of unlocking the secrets of how babies learn language to boost our own pronunciation skills as adults.
Right. And I think, a good place to start is with understanding the limits of traditional phonology. And how that's really kind of focused on the mechanics of how to make a sound, where do you put your tongue, where do you put your lips? But it doesn't always really explain the actual sounds themselves.
Yeah. It's like trying to learn to dance by just looking at footprints. You need to feel the music and actually move your body.
Exactly.
So how does Odisho's research kind of suggest we tackle this?
Well, he introduces this concept of neural phonology. And what that does is it shifts the focus from the physical production on the sound to how our brains actually process sounds. So your brain already has a system for grouping sounds together, even if they're not exactly the same. And these slight variations we call allophones.
Can you give me an example of that? Because I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around it.
Sure. So think about the P sound in English. When you say a word like pin, there's this puff of air that comes out. We call that aspiration. But when you say the word spin, there's no puff of air. There's no aspiration. But your brain automatically recognizes both of those as the same P sound, even though they're produced a little bit differently.
So my brain is already a master of grouping sounds together. I never even thought about it that way. But how does that help me when I'm learning a new language?
Well, here's the thing. When you encounter a new sound in another language, your brain tries to fit that new sound into the categories that it already has. But those categories might not always line up perfectly.
So that's where things can go wrong.
Exactly so. Odisho gives the example of Arabic speakers, sometimes confusing the P and B sounds in English because their brains are trying to categorize those sounds based on the system they already have.
Okay, so how do we break free from those ingrained sound categories and learn to hear and produce new sounds correctly?
Well, I think one thing that Odisho points to is that we need to learn from babies. Babies don't learn language through textbooks and drills. They're using all their senses to absorb it. Sight, sound, touch, even their sense of body awareness. And they're doing it naturally without even thinking about it.
So you're saying I should ditch the textbooks and go back to babbling? I mean, I'm all for a more playful approach, but...
Not exactly. I mean, it's more about incorporating those multisensory elements into our learning process. So remember, babies are using all of their senses to build those sound categories in the first place. We can actually do the same thing as adults. But it takes a little bit more of a conscious effort.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just mimicking mouth movements. We're immersing ourselves in the sounds of the language, using all of our senses.
Exactly. And Odisho actually calls this the multisensory multicognitive approach, or MMA for short. And it's really about tapping into both our conscious and subconscious brain processes to make learning more efficient and even a little bit fun.
This is where I think start to get really interesting. So tell me a little bit more about how this MMA approach works in practice. What kind of multisensory magic are we talking about here? Okay, my brain is buzzing with all these possibilities, but let's get specific here. How does this MMA approach actually work in real life?
Well, imagine you're trying to learn the difference between the Spanish R, which is rolled on the roof of your mouth, and the English R, which sits a little bit further back. So instead of just having you repeat the sounds over and over again, which can be...
Yeah, I've definitely spaced out during a few pronunciation drills in my day.
Right. With the MMA approach, you would pair those sounds with vivid images. So think a roaring lion for that Spanish R, and a revving race car for that English R.
Ooh, so I'm not just hearing the sounds. I'm seeing them. I'm almost feeling them. That's a lot more engaging than just repeating sounds over and over.
Exactly. And that multi-layered approach helps you make stronger connections in your brain, which makes it more likely that you're going to remember the correct pronunciation.
Okay, so we're using visuals. What other kind of sensory tricks are in this MMA toolbox?
Well, remember how babies are always using their sense of touch to explore the world? We can actually use that same principle to learn sounds. So let's go back to those sh and she sounds that we were talking about earlier. So instead of just listening, you could actually try gently placing your hand on your throat as you say shh, and you'll feel that lack of vibration. Then try the same thing with she and notice that buzzing vibration.
Wow, I can actually feel the difference. It's like my hand is giving my brain some extra information about how to produce those sounds.
Exactly, and these techniques can be adapted for all sorts of different sounds. So, for example, to really master that French U sound, which is often tricky for English speakers, you can try rounding your lips tightly almost as if you're about to whistle, and feel how your lips are positioned.
Ooh, it feels like a mini workout for my mouth. You're making pronunciation so much more tangible and less abstract.
That's the beauty of it. It really turns pronunciation from this mental exercise into a full body experience. And that brings us to another key element of the MMA approach, kinesthetics, or using movement to learn.
Okay, we're getting our whole body involved now. I'm intrigued, but how does moving around actually help us learn sounds?
Well, think about it. Babies are constantly in motion as they're learning language. They're wiggling, they're pointing, they're waving their arms around. And we can actually harness that same energy to solidify sounds in our own brains.
Okay, I'm ready to get my groove on. Give me an example.
Okay, so let's say you're struggling with the difference between the English L and R sounds, which can be a real tongue twister for some learners. Try this. Point your tongue straight up towards the roof of your mouth for that L sound, and then curl it slightly backwards for R. It's almost like your tongue is dancing between those two positions.
I'm feeling it. It's like I'm actually tracing the shape of the letters with my tongue.
Yeah.
This is really helpful.
Right. It might seem a little silly, but when you engage your body in this way, it actually creates a physical memory of that sound, which can be surprisingly effective.
Okay, so we're seeing, we're hearing, we're touching, we're moving. I'm starting to understand how this multisensory approach really makes those neural connections stick. But what about the subconscious? We talked about that a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
How does MMA tap into that kind of hidden power?
Well, I think one of the best ways to really leverage your subconscious is through repetition, but not the boring, mindless kind of repetition. So think about how a catchy song gets stuck in your head.
Oh yeah, I've definitely had those earworm moments.
Right. It's the same principle with language learning. Instead of just drilling isolated sounds, immerse yourself in the rhythm and melody of the language. Sing along to songs, repeat phrases from movies, even try your hand at some tongue twisters.
So it's about repetition, but with a purpose.
Yeah.
Weaving those sounds into kind of this richer tapestry of language.
Exactly. And when you expose your brain to those sounds in a more natural and engaging way, you're essentially sneaking them into your subconscious. It's like planting these seeds that will eventually blossom into effortless automatic pronunciation.
I am totally on board with this stealthy pronunciation training.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the visuals, we've got the touch, the movement, even a little bit of subconscious programming going on. Is there anything else that this MMA approach has to offer?
Well, there's one more piece of the puzzle that's often overlooked in traditional pronunciation teaching, and that's rhythm and intonation. Every language has its own musicality, its own flow and cadence, and mastering those subtle elements can make a huge difference in how natural and fluent you sound.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me a little bit more about this musical side of pronunciation.
Okay, well, think about it this way. Even if you're pronouncing every single sound perfectly, if your rhythm and intonation are off, you're still going to sound a little bit robotic or foreign.
So it's not just about hitting the right notes, it's about playing the whole song.
Exactly. And the MMA approach actually gives us tools to help us do just that. So for example, Odisho talks about the difference between the Spanish and English vowel systems. Spanish has this more open, relaxed vowel system, often described as centrifugal, whereas English vowels tend to be a little bit more tense and closed or centripetal.
Okay, I'm picturing those vowel charts in my head again.
Right. And when you're practicing your Spanish, try to let those vowels kind of flow outwards, almost as if you're opening up your mouth wide to let that sound out.
Yeah.
That will help you get that natural Spanish rhythm and flow.
That's a great tip. I can definitely see how understanding those nuances can make a big difference and how natural I sound.
Yeah, it's all about creating a more holistic, integrated approach to pronunciation. And that's what makes this MMA approach so powerful. It's not just about mimicking sounds. It's about understanding the music of the language, the way it feels in your body, and the way your brain makes sense of it all.
This is blowing my mind. I'm starting to see how pronunciation is so much more than just memorizing rules and drilling sounds. It's like this whole body, whole brain experience.
Precisely. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the cognitive processes that really underpin all of this learning.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into the deep end of the brain pool. Lead the way. Okay, so let's talk brain power. We've covered all our senses and how that helps us learn pronunciation. But I'm curious how the cognitive processes fit into all of this.
Right, well, it's really a crucial piece of the puzzle. And as Odisho points out in his research, things like attention and memory and even analysis play a big role in helping us master pronunciation.
Okay, I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering how I can actually use those cognitive skills to improve my pronunciation. It all feels a bit abstract right now.
Sure, let's make it a little more concrete. So think about when you encounter a new sound for the first time. You have to really focus on it and listen carefully to the unique qualities of that sound. So that's where your attention comes in. And then you have to be able to hold on to that auditory information. So that's your memory working.
Okay, so far so good. I'm paying attention. I'm trying to remember. What's next?
Then your brain kind of kicks into analysis mode. You start breaking down the sound. How is it produced? Where's your tongue? What are your lips doing? You compare it to sounds that you already know, maybe from your native language.
Oh, so it's like my brain is becoming a sound detective,
Yeah,
gathering clues and piecing them together.
exactly. And then finally, you try to actually reproduce that sound yourself, drawing on all the information that you've just processed. So that's where synthesis comes in. You're putting all the pieces together to create this new sound.
Wow, that is a lot more mental work than I realized. No wonder pronunciation can feel like such a challenge sometimes.
It is a challenge, but the
Yeah.
MMA approach gives us a framework to kind of approach this strategically. So one simple but really powerful technique is to consciously engage with sounds before you even try to say them.
Oh, okay.
So for example, if you're learning a new word, listen to a native speaker, say it several times. And don't just passively listen. Really tune into the sounds, the rhythm, the intonation.
So it's almost like priming my brain, getting it familiar with the soundscape before I actually try to produce anything.
Exactly. That way you're building a clearer mental representation of that sound, which makes it much easier to reproduce accurately.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Usually I just try to repeat the word right away,
Yeah.
but I can see how taking that extra time to listen and analyze can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And here's another key cognitive strategy, and that is to avoid getting bogged down in technical jargon.
Oh, yeah.
So when you're learning any language, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by all these linguistic terms.
I've been there. Sometimes it feels like I need a dictionary just to understand the pronunciation explanation.
It can be really confusing. Instead, what you want to do is focus on simple and clear explanations that break down those concepts into manageable chunks. Think of it this way. You're trying to build a bridge between the sounds that you already know and these new sounds that you're learning.
So instead of focusing on abstract terms, I should be looking for those connections, those aha moments that help me understand how the sounds work.
Exactly. And when it comes to actually getting feedback on your pronunciation, focus on getting specific and actionable advice. It's not enough to be told that's wrong. You need to understand why it's wrong and, more importantly, how to fix it.
So instead of just right or wrong, I need to look for guidance that helps me adjust and improve.
Yes. Think of it like a coach giving you pointers on your form. They're not going to just say you're doing it wrong. They're going to actually show you how to position your body, how to move more efficiently. And this is where those multisensory techniques that we were talking about earlier come back into play. When you're receiving feedback, use visuals, use gestures, even touch to help you feel the correct placement of your tongue or your lips.
So it's like taking the abstract and making it real, giving my brain and body these concrete reference points.
Precisely. And remember, mastering pronunciation is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes a willingness to experiment.
It sounds like the MMA approach gives us a really great roadmap for that journey, a way to navigate the complexities of pronunciation in a fun and engaging way.
It does. And I think the most important takeaway here is that anyone can improve their pronunciation. It's not about some innate talent. It's about understanding how your brain learns sounds and then using strategies that actually leverage your strengths.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit to use when I'm working on pronunciation, not just for the language I'm studying now, but any language that I choose to explore in the future.
That's the beauty of it. These principles are universal. So the next time you find yourself kind of wrestling with a tricky sound, remember what we've talked about today. Engage your senses, experiment with movement. Don't be afraid to get playful. And above all, be patient with yourself.
Beautifully said. Well, to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to embrace the challenge of pronunciation with renewed energy and a sense of adventure. Keep experimenting, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into this fascinating world of language.